Welcome to the Communication Diva Podcast, Episode 18. In today's podcast, Jenn discusses the importance of tone of voice. The power of paralanguage means that how we say something can communicate a lot more than the actual words we use. Paying attention to one's tone of voice can result in exceedingly more powerful communication ability. I'm reminded in this instance of the words of 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who wrote, "One often contradicts an opinion when what is uncongenial is really the tone in which it was conveyed." While I think Nietzsche is absolutely correct in this instance, it does not help explain Alvin the Chipmunk.
Hi everyone, so glad you are listening. I'm Jenn Swanson and I'd like to welcome you back. If this is your first time listening to the Communication Diva podcast, the purpose of this podcast is to explore all areas of communication in order to help you communicate better in your life and in your relationships. We're back again here in Vancouver to rain, and I'm glad it wasn't raining on the weekend. I spent my weekend with a group of teenagers at a youth event called Walking the Talk, where we volunteered for a day at the First United Church Mission in the infamous downtown east side of Vancouver. It's so well known that it uses an acronym now, so it's Downtown East Side, DTES. And all sorts of stuff goes on down there. This is where there is an enormous number of street people and people who are addicted to all sorts of different substances, who are suffering from mental illness, and who have had a really, really rough life. So we spent the Friday night talking about it. We had a criminal prosecutor come in and talk to the kids about what we were to expect. And then Saturday morning we transited down there and we spent the day working. There were about 24 of us, several adults and about, I think, 17 kids, ages ranging from 12 to 20. And we washed walls and we swept floors, and kids went out in teams to work in the thrift store and sort clothes and to sweep the grounds outside. And one pair of kids had a fellow whip out his Bible and follow them around reading all his favorite Bible passages. It was pretty funny. And there was a project that was going on. There was a room that had housed a bunch of people for sleeping accommodations that had been cleared out. There's been some issues going on there with the city, and so a bunch of the beds had to be removed from this one area. And there had been artwork created by the people that use the facility, the mission. And the artwork was actually glued onto the stucco walls of this room with carpenter's glue. And it had been glued there for a couple of years. And they used a lot of glue. So it took several of the teens with hammer and chisel and a machete, actually, to chip off this artwork and try very carefully not to destroy any of it, because some of it was truly beautiful. And that took all day. And the rest of us were washing tables and washing floors and interacting with the people that live there as they came in and out. We also had a fantastic meal at lunchtime that was put on by one of the Sikh temples in the area that came down and served an absolutely delicious meal. And we sat with some of the residents and the people who come in to eat there. They serve about 1,000 meals a day at this mission. It's absolutely huge. And one of the conversations that I had was just amazing with a person who was actually a real teacher, and he was talking about all sorts of things like getting out of our own way and getting out of ego. I mean, this was deep stuff. And one of the things that struck me about this whole weekend was how deep the conversations were with the people that we met. And that's a topic for another podcast. But it was just a very significant, real day. We ended up going to a park that's very famous called Oppenheimer Park, and some of the kids engaged in soccer games with some of the people that were there. There was a band playing, and one of our kids was a really good bass player, and he jumped up and played with this group of really rough-looking guys who were very kind and very welcoming to him. And it was just a beautiful experience. We walked back to the church we were sleeping on the floor of, and did some debriefing with the kids, took them swimming. And then yesterday we walked or ran the 10-kilometer Vancouver Sun Run for the homeless, and our little group raised about $1,500 to go to the First United Church Mission. So it was a very busy and full weekend, and I'm exhausted. And so working on this podcast first thing Monday morning here for you. The topic that I had chosen for today, talking about tone of voice, what are you really saying, is one that I wrote about last year in a blog post, but that it seems to be of interest to people. People are searching the website every day looking for tone of voice topics and information. So I thought it would be good to record this in a podcast. And some of this information is also included in my ebook called How to Be Professional in the Workplace. And there are links to this ebook and to the blog post at www.communicationdiva.com. There's a tab at the top that has my books on it that you can click on and find the book. The book is a short guide, 20 to 25 pages. It is $1.99, so that's very reasonable. And I encourage you to look at it and to think about giving it as a gift for anybody entering the workplace, either for the first time or again, and particularly for people who are high school age or college age who might benefit from some of the very practical tips on how to be more professional in the workplace. So please check that out. It's available on Kindle. It's also available through Smashwords, which allows you to download PDF files of it or to look at it on devices such as Kobo or the Nook Book. So that it can be downloaded to just about any device. And again, at $1.99, I think it's a lot of value for a very little price. So please check that out. Now, tone of voice. What are you really saying? Have you ever had anyone say to you, "Why did you say it like that?" I know I have. So if so, then what you were saying verbally was not matching up with your tone of voice. And actually a completely different message was being communicated. And this happens sometimes. Sometimes the words we say don't mean much. So what we are saying with our paralanguage is much more meaningful. And paralanguage is a word. Para means around, and language means words. So paralanguage means all of the things that are not actually the words. So your body language is part of paralanguage, your tone of voice, your pitch, the speed that you speak at, the loudness that you speak at, all of these things, the inflections, all of these things make a difference to what actually gets communicated. And I think this is why sometimes we get in trouble with text messaging and with also email, because you don't get any of that paralanguage. You get strictly the words. And so the little inflections and the little sing-songs and the bits that allow other people to know if you're joking or not, or if you're being sarcastic, or if you're angry, are not there. So words have to be chosen very carefully if they're written down, or else a lot of miscommunication happens, as you probably have already discovered. Sometimes if you hit the caps lock by accident and you're typing everything in capital letters, people might think you're yelling at them. And without that paralanguage, without the tone of voice, without the extras, it's very hard sometimes to decipher. Here's an exercise that I give to my human relations skill students at the college that I teach at, that is a fun one for them. They get to do a little bit of playing around with this. What it is I give them the exact same sentence over and over and over again, but they give them instructions on how to say it differently each time. So I use the sentence, "I want to go home now," and I have them say it to each other using guidelines. So, for example, I get them to say it loudly, and then softly, and then with a pause between each word. And then the one that makes everybody giggly is I get them to say it in a breathy whisper. So here is what these sound like. And remember that the sentence is exactly the same wording each time. It's just the instructions around paralanguage that are different. So loudly, I want to go home now. So the communication could be frustration. It could be mad. You could be tired and you just want to get out of there. Or it could be a very noisy environment. That's one of them. The soft one, the next one, I want to go home now. That could mean that maybe you don't want anyone else to hear. So you're saying it softly into someone else's ear because you don't want to make anybody feel bad. Maybe you are super tired. Maybe you're really bored. So those are, again, exactly the same sentence. One is loud, one is soft, and it could communicate different messages. The next one was pausing between each word. I want to go home now. So you're emphasizing your wishes to someone else in no uncertain terms. You're highly ticked off, or you want other people to listen to you because they're not for some reason. Those could all be messages that you are communicating when you say, I want to go home now. And lastly, the breathy whisper, I want to go home now. Well, obviously, you have other things on your mind than what's going on at the moment. This could be very suggestive. Or you could be out of breath because you just ran 10K or whatever the case may be. But it could be a completely different communication than the first one. And again, we're just using exactly the same sentence. So tone of voice makes all the difference. And sometimes tone of voice can make you seem very professional or very unprofessional. And it's something to at least be aware of and to pay attention to. Now, people in broadcasting, people in podcasting do pay attention to this. There are some people, for me, whose voice drives me nuts. And it may be the same for you. I know that there is a reporter on a radio station who works in Ottawa. And whenever she signs off and says where she lives, instead of saying her name and Ottawa, she says, Ottawa. And she says it exactly like that, and it drives me nuts. And I don't know why it drives me nuts. But, it's almost like she's super proud that she is working from Ottawa, which is our capital city here. I don't know. I don't understand why that it bothers me. But, she'll say her name. I don't even remember what her name is. So Joan Smith. And instead of saying Joan Smith, Ottawa, it's Joan Smith, Ottawa. It's so silly, but so I don't know why certain, my voice might drive you nuts and some people might not be listening because of that. Other people, have beautiful voices and we love to listen to the voice because of that. I know one person that is a colleague of mine who has an amazingly high-pitched voice. She sounds very, very, very young and a very high-pitched voice. When she sings, it's absolutely beautiful. But the voice that she has is very distinct and very different. Several of the years that I worked in the hospital were spent in the emergency department of a busy community hospital. I think it was 3 years that I spent there. And I wanted to tell you one of my funniest memories. And this is in my ebook and it's on a blog post. So you may have read this already. But, how many funny things can happen in emergency? You would be surprised. There was a lot of horrible stuff going on, but there was also a lot of humor and funny things. And one of them is what I have called Sexy Voice Girl, or SVG for short. And I don't ever think I actually met this woman, but every time I heard her voice, that it was memorable. So what was fascinating about this whole thing was witnessing the reaction of the other people around me. So SVG, or Sexy Voice Girl, was a switchboard operator who worked in the hospital and who was also responsible for making all of the announcements on the overhead PA system. Now, they don't do too much of that anymore in my experience. There's a lot more that is done with cell phones, etc. But years ago, before cell phones, there were overhead announcements for all sorts of things. People who had left their lights on in the parking lot, doctors that needed to be paged to the operating room or to the case room where babies were being delivered. There was all sorts of things going on. So emergency situations called codes. You've probably heard of a code blue for a cardiac arrest, or there are all sorts of different codes. All of those things were important forms of communication. Now, what was so unusual about Sexy Voice Girl was the tone of voice she adopted when on the loudspeaker. So imagine, if you will, a soft, breathy whisper saying, "Dr. Roberts, call 222. Dr. Roberts, call 222, please." Now that is exactly how she sounded. And it was so Marilyn Monroe. It was so bizarre to hear in a professional setting. And people would stop whatever they were doing and stare up at the ceiling at the little loudspeakers whenever this voice would come on, because it was so stunning. They would get these incredulous looks on their faces because it was almost unbelievable. It was so unprofessional. And there would be a lot of giggling. There would be a lot of eye rolling. People would look at each other and shrug their shoulders or shake their heads. It was amusing and it was a little embarrassing. And I can't believe that she was able to continue for as long as she did, sounding this way. And I don't know what her motivation was. As I said, I don't think I ever met her. But perhaps she was thinking that she needed to be softer, because the PA system came right into the bedrooms of all the patients and everything else. And so I kind of wonder if she was trying to be gentle and soft, because I can't imagine somebody trying to be, provocative on an overhead speaker in a hospital setting. So there was great determination of many people to stroll past the switchboard department window to see if they could catch a glimpse of this person behind the voice, because everybody was curious. And I really have no idea if Sexy Voice Girl, or SVG, had any clue as to the effect her performance was having. I don't imagine she spoke that way normally, but it was very strange. Now here's a question for you. We sometimes do switch into unusual voices depending on our circumstances. So have you ever heard people speak to babies? Sometimes we get all silly and gooey talking to the babies and we say, "Oh, it's a cute little baby," and that kind of drives me crazy. I hate that stuff, but lots of people do it. Also talking to pets. What kind of all sorts of strange voice variations come out when we encounter little puppies? And interestingly, with babies and puppies, our voices get higher pitched and often begin with a loud "ah" sound. Or when we meet a big and burly Great Dane or something like that, our voices may get deep and gruff. And we're very strange creatures. So here's a thought. What do you do around babies and pets and little people? Something to think about. How do you sound, right? Many people that I know have a particular voice they put on for work. So ask anybody who has worked in a major hotel or a restaurant and ask them if they have put on their Plaza Hotel voice for you. Welcome to the Fairmont Hotel, that kind of thing. The movie guy at the start of all those movies, the deep, rich voice, and I can't do it, but, in a world where there are few options, you know what I mean. That voice, that deep voice who's always telling you what world the movie is about to be set in, is very particular. And people who do voiceovers practice this. The fact that we can change our voices to suit our situations means that we can train ourselves to sound more professional and more appropriate if we put our minds to it in practice. Take a little survey before you begin and ask a friend or family member that you trust to evaluate the sound quality of your voice. Is your voice too whiny? Is it too soft and quiet? Are people always saying to you, "Pardon me, what? I didn't hear you. Can you speak up?" Do you speak too quickly? I know some people who speak so fast, and I speak fairly quickly, that sometimes it's hard to keep up or it's exhausting to listen to. Does your voice have a cadence to it? Does it have higher and lower pitches throughout, or is it monotonous? Do you say everything on the same note all of the time? And do people get turned off and not listen to you anymore? I know that I've listened to professors who talk that way, and it is the fastest way for me to go to sleep. If somebody doesn't have cadence to their voice, it affects other people. So asking somebody else to do an honest evaluation of your voice quality, your voice tone, will assist you in identifying parts that you might need to practice in order to improve. So, you need to find somebody, or you can do this yourself as well if you record your voice and then play it back. I know a lot of people will listen to their voices on their cell phone message or their answering machine and say, "Ooh, I hate how I sound." I don't even like listening to my own podcasts. I have to because I've made some editing mistakes and forgotten to edit things because I haven't listened all the way through, but I don't like listening to my voice either. And I know a lot of actors who don't like to see themselves on film because they think that's not how I actually look, or that's not how I actually sound. And everyone around says, yes, it is. But it's funny how often we don't like the sound of our own voice. Because remember, you're listening inside your head. You're hearing your voice on the inside. You're not hearing what everybody else hears on the outside. You physically can't do it unless you record yourself and play it back. So that might be instructional for you too, is to record your voice, play it back, and critique it, or see if there are some things you could do to improve. Otherwise, ask a friend, ask somebody in your family to do this. So here are some tips for you on improving tone of voice. Modulate your voice. Speak at a medium volume so that you can be heard, but you're not shouting. Sometimes I have students who are very shy, who are used to speaking very slowly. And when we're out in the hospital setting, in the clinical setting, this doesn't work very well. It's a noisy, busy atmosphere, and I'm sure this is the same at any office. And it's important for the person to speak loudly and clearly. This drives me nuts in my other job when I'm working with youth who are getting up in front of a church congregation to do something, present a skit or do some readings or whatever. And if they don't speak up, there's absolutely no point having them up there, because all the people will see is a person up there moving their mouth. And if you can't hear the person and what they're saying, it's a source of frustration. I know particularly for some of the older people who have some hearing loss issues, that if you can't hear the person that is speaking, what's the point? It's not helpful, it's not useful. So make sure that you are loud enough to be able to be heard, but that you're not shouting. Another way to become more professional in your tone of voice and you're using your words is to avoid using slang words or casual greeting. When you're being professional on the telephone, you want to say hello and thank you rather than hi or thanks and or hey, which I use at the beginning of my podcast a fair bit, but I'm trying to be more casual. But if you are in a professional setting and speaking to professional people, you want to use hello and thank you and yes rather than yeah, things like that. Another tip is to smile before you begin, especially if you are on the telephone. Now, believe it or not, that smile will translate into your tone of voice and you will sound friendlier and might even feel a little bit friendlier. And this is an old technique that is offered in many, many business classes about telephone etiquette, is to actually physically smile and then start. And strangely enough, it works. So I already talked about recording yourself and having somebody else listen. One of the things you can do when you do this is to track how many times you use filler words in your speech. And filler words are words such as like, which drives me crazy, or which I am guilty of a lot, or right. And that doesn't mean these words don't mean anything. They just fill gaps while you're trying to find the next word. And some of these words will make you sound far less intelligent than you actually are. And there's a saying that is kind of annoying these days, when people end sentences with saying, I know, right? And that just makes the person seem less intelligent. It's the same thing with the word like that is used inappropriately. And sometimes I do it too. I'm living in a house with four kids in my life that, well, they're not all living here, but some of them are grown up now. But they still use the word like, and it's almost punctuation. Once you are aware of these words, you will notice them yourself, and you can try to avoid using them. But habits can be hard to break, so this is going to take work. It takes something like 3 months, and that's the appropriate use of the word like, by the way. So it takes something like 3 months to break a habit or change a habit or create a new habit. So this will take work. And for myself, I am still using far too much in the podcasts. And I will be watching that, and I work on it and I try, but it's one of the things that I need to work on. Another thing is to not end every sentence with a question mark. This makes you sound unsure of what you are talking about, and it can be extremely distracting for the listener. So, for example, it's a nice day out. No, I'm not even doing that right. It's a nice day out, right? It's using the word right or using something, but often I don't even know if I can give you an example right now, but there are people who seem to end every sentence with a question mark. And I'm not sure why, but that does not sound professional. So that would be something to pay attention to. Another thing to do is to learn from good examples. Listen to people around you, especially in business settings where there has been some communication training with regard to voice. And many people who work on the telephone on a regular basis have developed very professional quality voice skills. So sometimes just listening and emulating what you can hear can be helpful. I remember being at a wedding, and I don't know if I've told you this story before or not, but I was at a wedding a number of years ago where there was a justice of the peace who was doing the ceremony. And I was a maid of honor or something in this wedding. It was a very small wedding in a backyard. There was me, and there was a best man, and then the bride and the groom. And I remember that the justice of the peace was giving us instructions and everything was fine. She was talking normally. And then as soon as the ceremony started, she flipped into this bizarre tone of voice. And she drew every word out as though it had many beats to it. And it was very, very difficult to not burst out laughing, and I was giggling, and I remember I was holding a bouquet, and this bouquet was shaking because I was trying not to laugh. I was laughing. Oh, it was just so dreadful. She, instead of saying, the bride and groom were Wayne and Trina were their names, and instead of saying, Wayne and Trina, do you gather here today, or whatever the words were, she'd say, Wayne and Trina, and I am not kidding you. Every word had this high-pitched, long, drawn-out sound to it that was just bizarre. It was as though she was speaking to aliens or something. I can't even describe it. And people were looking around with their eyes wide, and there were smirks everywhere. And I was thinking, what is the point of this? But this was apparently her performance voice. And she would switch into this voice tone that was just a little bit over the top. Actually, it was a lot over the top. And it just that's all I can remember about this wedding, which was horrible for the people who were getting married, because I don't think they videotaped it, thank goodness. But someone else came running up to us after the service and said, I was at a wedding at the beach at White Rock, 2 weeks ago, and I think it was the same woman. I didn't recognize her face, but I recognized her voice. I thought, oh my goodness. So be careful what you do with your tone of voice when you are trying to convey a message, especially if you are trying to convey a message of professionalism. Pay attention to your slang. Pay attention to your cadence and your modulation. Pay attention to the filler words that you use. Pay attention to the loudness, the softness, the pitch, all of these things, because you are sending messages with each one of those things that you might not even realize you are sending. So for Sexy Voice Girl, it was funny for the rest of us, but I imagine that she would have been absolutely mortified to learn what effect she was having on the people around her when she said, "Dr. Jones, to the operating room, stat!" And for her sake, I hope somebody coached her gently so that she was not a source of amusement and ridicule in the next job she ended up in. I don't know where she ended up going. She was only there for a little while, but maybe, just maybe, she ended up in the movies. So that's all for today, folks. I hope you found something of value here, and I hope that you will let me know what your thoughts are on voice tone and how it's not always about the words we say, but often about the way we say these words. I know one listener wrote to me to say he wondered about the voice being able to communicate social status and socioeconomic status as well, and he thought that perhaps I had grown up in a upper middle class family going to a private school, which actually is completely wrong. I had a single mom, and who was putting herself through nursing school, and we were on social assistance for a while. I never went to a private school. I went to a francophone school for a while, and to a French immersion school. And then when we moved across the country out to the West Coast, went to a regular English public school, and never had the privilege that apparently this listener thought my voice, denoted. So interesting that we might judge people and assess people and imagine where people come from the tone of voice and the quality of voice and the language that they use. Now, I know actors have to often train out accents or dialects in order to not communicate their birth backgrounds on film or radio. That's part of what they do in some cases. And this is an interesting thought. Can we really learn more about people by just listening to their voices and how they speak, more so than what they are actually saying? That's a good question that I'm going to leave you with. And if you have any thoughts or answers to that, I would love for you to let me know what they are. So come on over to www.communicationdiva.com. Leave some comments, questions, anything you want to get going as a conversation. I would love to hear you, and I answer every single email. So lots more to talk about. Thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Jenn Swanson. God bless.